Welcome to another episode of the Family Office Real Estate Institute podcast. I have Cory Bultinck with us from Wipfli, and we are going to talk about succession planning. Cory, I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to this topic, which tends to be top of mind of a lot of family offices and similar organizations. So happy to be here.
Yeah, we made a joke earlier about recession planning. We're like, we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about long-term succession planning as a whole. So why don't we start off and what percentage would you say of families that you see either don't have a succession plan in place or have something, but not really a properly structured or thought out succession plan?
Yeah, good question. I think the numbers, I would just say higher than you anticipate. And in many cases, it's not really a formal plan. And one of the things with succession planning is that a lot of those plans need to have flexibility and have the ability to have some, nimbleness to it. Facts change, assumptions change, economics change, families change. And so a lot of times that awareness starts when they're, in the wealth accumulation mode, and you start thinking about the next off ramp or the next steps for your organization or how you're going to scale. And usually within your 40s and 50s, you're starting to think about some minor moves or some culture or some of the options that are presented on that off ramp. And then once you're in your 50s and 60s, you're most likely executing on those options and have more clarity as to what your exit or what you're going to do in your retirement or kind of what your next, role in life is going to be. And those are just rough, age timeframes. But most organizations, I would say very few, maybe 10, 20% actually have a plan in place and are actually executing on it. So that seems really small. I think a lot of us have thoughts in our heads, or for the entrepreneur, we have thoughts in our heads as to the exit. And it could be as simply as, hey, I'm going to sell and I'm going to get cash. But in many cases, it's a lot more complex. Mainly because of the talent pool, also because of the financial considerations and tax considerations and estate planning considerations, looking to maximize value, and also just the ever-changing family dynamics and economic climate as to kind of what brought that wealth accumulation to the table, and maybe how that's changed or how the kind of the continuity of that relationship or business or kind of the secret sauce is going to continue.
How often is it, have you seen that there's a thought process or already starting to implement bringing in some family member as part of the organization at some time within that, or already have them in place?
A lot of that assessment in terms of your plan does hinge on the talent pool, which may or may not include family members. So a lot of times in family businesses or family offices, there are critical mass in terms of, familial, relatives or sons, cousins, and daughters, and, that could have an interest in the business, certainly. Now, just because they have an interest doesn't mean they have the skill sets or qualifications and all the other intangibles necessary, which is also a part of that assessment. So certainly this is an evolving thing. I mean, I talked about 30s and 40s is where you're starting to assess it. In many cases at that age, your kids may be still in grade school or figuring out, their next or their career path. So it gets difficult to understand what the talent pool is like when you're in that wealth accumulation stage. Usually,
No, please keep going. Usually
when you're, starting to see them enter, college or figure out kind of, what their passion is in terms of how they're going to contribute to the family or society or, keep them, busy in their career, is where they're starting to figure out whether the family business is a good fit. And even in conjunction with that is, in many cases, and seeing a certain trend is for many of those family members that have an interest in the family business is to get experience outside of the family business first, and to really understand kind of how to contribute, how to, not rely on that familial, ancestry or that experience to kind of create, good practices. And in many cases that experience outside the family business is critical for creating, good work ethic and also bringing new ideas to the forefront. Some of the best ways to learn how to, work in the family business or present new ideas is to work in other organizations and learn best practices and bring those to the table. So we've certainly seen that as an emerging trend.
You're an emerging trend. I'm with you on that 100%. And even if it's for 2-3 years, I mean, that is the way to go, hands down, from what I've seen between the two. And that's for a number of reasons. I mean, there's also, and I'm sure you've seen this and tell me if not, but that just because you're a family member doesn't mean that you're the best person for the job. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have that vision or the ability to implement and take it to the next level, right?
Yep. Yeah. And that's, you're asking all the right questions. It's just because your family doesn't mean you're the right person. And so that's where some of these things that perpetuate as you get more information and have a plan that may be adjusted, or you get, better information as you, progress in life or the business evolves, is the talent pool or the right fit may not necessarily be in the family. And there could perpetuate really difficult conversations for the betterment of the family. There's many cases where you'll see that they almost feel entitled, or they feel like they have to do something that may not be in the best interest in wealth accumulation and or the family and or family dynamics. And those are hard conversations to have. But certainly if you're doing that at the get-go or articulating kind of the needs and skill sets of the business and or strategy, you have more time to kind of navigate those difficult conversations.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's also a business, the atmosphere, just the, what's the word I'm looking for? How the business operates, because I've seen before when family members have come in and gone above people that's been there for a long, long time, that's been working their way up the ladder, and they know that they're better than this person, but all of a sudden this family member comes in above, and it's like, talk about demotivation, right?
Yeah. 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 And there's, there's a sense of entitlement or, familial, and so you're asking all the right awareness and assessments, and, the implications to that family member that's taking on that role and how they're going to be perceived and respected by those that they're managing, as well as others that are being affected by, their hard work and driven and culture that they've contributed over a period of time, and loyalty. So there's a lot of dynamics that are more complex than people tend to think. And so that's where the awareness, assessment, reassessment, and understanding and having those critical, in many cases, uncomfortable conversations can be helpful.
What about, and this happens in the family office itself too, the patriarch, the matriarch, not wanting to give up reins, wanting to maintain control, not wanting to share information, not wanting to step aside in any manner.
Yeah.
That's something you see often. I mean, it's definitely an issue, right?
Yeah, small business, family office. I mean, there's a lot of organizations that have, ingrained succession planning. Like I think of like partnerships and law firms and things where you have several partners, you have a transition plan, you have plenty of talent, resources, and pool of associates to leverage. In the small family offices and businesses, you may only have decision makers that are 1, 2, or a few, or 3 people, or in some cases 1. And so it takes time to understand, how to step back, how to transfer that control, that authority. And, one of the things that can come into play is you, by merit or by title, are transferring that authority, but really outside of that, they're still making all the decisions and things. So there's not only a title change that needs to occur within there, but also just a responsibility. And in many cases, relationships play a key role. And so how do you foster and perpetuate relationships that have been key to the family's success to the next generation? And how does that happen? And in many cases, it's not, establishing relationships with the existing kind of network. It's creating new relationships for the next generation to perpetuate, that network that was so successful previously. So, what CPAs or legal or advice or investment, advisors, or what other professionals can we build around the next gen that are a good fit and will be around, and wasn't, mom's, attorney, or that, a different relationship. You need to create new relationships in many cases, and can't kind of perpetuate in the same manner that dad did or mom did.
One of the things I've seen from very successful businesses that did have everything in place, from quarterly objectives to goals to, thought out plans of how to implement, etc. Once they have that exit, they have all of this money, hundreds and hundreds or billions of dollars, and now it's within the family, right? And they're like, well, let's set up a family office for this. It astonishes me how a lot of that becomes forgotten, whereas there is no goal, there is no plan, there is no follow-up, there is no, right? I mean, hiring the best people, like they were always hiring the best people. Well, now they don't want to pay or, right? Yeah. And it amazes me because I'm like, look, they've obviously been very, very successful. They just need to replicate what they were doing from that structural perspective within the family.
Yeah. Culture, trust, loyalty, finding true advocates that are in the best interest of, your family office is critical. There's a lot of, I would say, good, best practices in choosing professionals and choosing talent, and, going through that process that are learned. And that's one of the key things to transfer is, how did, mom and dad, or the, key leaders, how did they select the core contributors to their success? And, how do you perpetuate that to the next gen, for sure?
Yeah. I mean, and one of the biggest issues that I see is once again, if they're used to paying for the best talent and everything else, a lot of families don't want to pay the third party professionals that would come in-house, which is really difficult, because that takes away from the pool of potential people. And I've also seen that where I say 95% of the people fall into the family office space, because when there is a sale of a business, they immediately go to, okay, who do I trust? Maybe my accountant, maybe my attorney, maybe my neighbor, maybe my planner, right? And because I know that they may not know everything, but at least I know I can trust them, right? And then you also have the component of, which is a common thing, and it goes back to compensation, is, well, you're a family member, you're running this, we shouldn't have to really pay you for the time and everything that you're doing, right? Which once again goes against the component of having the best people or paying for what the people are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of the best organizations are built on trust, loyalty, advocacy, and having people that are serving your best interests. And so, aligning, people internally and externally is a huge, contributor to success. And in many cases, dollars and cents and fees or whatever it is part of that package, but it's not the number one item in many cases, at least that I have seen. But it, certainly should be given thought as you're, making selections.
What about what seems to be a trend, and it's happening with the younger generation? I mean, I even had this conversation with my son a number of months ago about not wanting to come into the business, not wanting to step into. It seems to me that a lot of the younger generations are not wanting to do that, and that it's pretty even split of who does and who doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's just kind of the evolution of, the assessment and understanding kind of the family members and the talent pool within the family, but also, internal, externally. But yeah, there are going to be, step brothers, step sisters. There's going to be people involved in the business, not involved in the business. There's going to be people that have higher authority within the business, and, all facets and options in terms of family dynamics. And it gets to be, there's certainly not a one size fits all. But how you navigate those, how do you continue to treat, equitable? And I like to say equitable because it's not equally, but it's equitable to their contributions. And so just know that I think people get a little bit naive in their 30s and 40s about this plan and thinking that everybody's going to be just like me, involved in the business, and they're going to rise the ranks and they're going to be, collaborative. But that's usually, not what happens. And, we're going to have particular family members that are involved in the business, and you're going to have divorces, and you're going to have grandkids, and you're going to have others that pursue other facets of life and have other interests that may or may not be within the family business. And how do you make that equitable is, certainly not a one size fits all, and can change. And in many cases, families have kind of a general assessment of how they treat, people that are step siblings or grandkids. They have kind of protocols in place. And in many cases, there's significant variability between families in how they address those types of things.
What's one of the most successful transitions that you've ever seen, and what made that be so successful?
Well, I mean, it's still ongoing. But I would say as you get through the generations, it gets to be trickier. And the key components is having a good balance of flexibility and starting early, and, have less focus on the numbers and dollars and more about their relationships and processes and kind of what they're doing to contribute to success. I think a lot of times we get a little bit too eager to share the dollars, and you get, entitlement, or you don't have the right guardrails to, inhibit some of the best practices of being good business people, or having good business acumen, or how you make selections out of relationships, or how you make good financial decisions. So a lot of the processes and the things of what we do become more important. And the ways that I've seen families create a culture of collaboration and, sharing their culture and decision-making process amongst many generations has been great. I know one that has quarterly meetings with all, 23 of their family members to talk about businesses, and some of the folks are as young as like 14. And so I'm hearing, mom, dad, and, grandma, grandpa, cousins talk about what they're working on, what they're, contributing to. And in some cases it's business play. Some cases it's even philanthropic. So it doesn't always have to be about making money. It's about understanding kind of how you're going to contribute or be a part of something, and what that means for themselves and the family. And I think instilling some of those, key, attributes at a young, or that kind of best practices at a young age, is kind of the most successful families that I've seen go through this process. Because you're creating awareness not only for those at the later generations, but also the young folks. They understand the need and the responsibility they have to perpetuate that to the next gen. And so you're creating the same cyclical, perpetual nature that, like, law firms and things have been around for 100 years, is they continue to foster this. You rise, you embrace the culture, you do all these things from day one, and you continue to give back to the next gen.
Okay, so I know that I'm going to sell my business at some point in time. I'm getting up there. I know that I need to do something. So I come to you, Cory, and I say, I'm wanting to make this transition, and I'm wanting to go about this. We're really at ground zero. What would be the first things that you would discuss with me as it relates to, hey, here I am. What do we do?
Yeah, and in most cases, it starts with you. And understanding your own personal goals and your financial parameters. There's cases where they have no idea how much money they need or what's the right amount of nest egg or cash flow that they're going to need once they exit the business. Then in some cases, they don't even understand the tax ramifications or how to transition, or they don't even know their next move from a personal. So we talked a little bit about kind of, hey, are they actually going to step away from the business? Okay, so what is your role going to be after you exit? Is it going to be on the board? Are you going to, be philanthropic? Are you going to play golf, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every day? Or kind of what's the next step? Like what's going to be your routine? And is that, what is your transition into that routine? So a lot of it's centered on making sure that the particular entrepreneur is teed up for success personally. Because what happens is if you get a little ahead of yourself, there tends to be some reluctance, or there tends to be other issues that come up as you're entering some of the options that come with their business. So once you kind of get through, hey, I'm okay with my cash flow, I'm okay with, my personal, contributions and my routines after the business. And then we start looking at options. I like to say options is because many people think that I'm just going to sell my business and get them cash and it's going to go in the bank account and I'm going to make these investments. And in many cases, it's a lot more difficult to that. So you got to look to the talent pool. You got to look to your options. Hey, is it, am I bringing on a new investor? Am I looking to bring on a family member? Am I looking to keep the business in the family? Or am I looking to sell to a third party? Am I looking to sell to a competitor? What is my business worth? All those questions kind of came up, and I think many people don't understand the various options and what ends up being the best fit. Now, if your talent resources are, not very, I would say appetizing, and you're not feeling like you got a family member, you're not feeling like you have a key employee that would be able to step into the role, a sale or a merger or some sort of a, exit, financially, out of the business entirely might be the best option. Especially given kind of where the business is going or what your crystal ball is.
That was one thing I was about to ask you. I was like, oh, well, how many people or how often, or I could see that somebody goes in to talk about transition and then it's like, oh, I'd be best if I sold this thing.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, absolutely. And each of those options, if it's a family member, the family member is probably thinking that they're just going to be given the business.
Yeah.
So is there a financial consideration to that? And how do you make that arrangement? I have often seen, 1 + 1 does not equal 2 when it's father to son or mother to daughter transition of a business. It tends to be, some it's, hey, I'm going to gift it to them and I don't need any financial consideration. In some cases, it's like, hey, I'm going to stay as a consultant and I want to get X dollars a month. There's some other intangibles. And so there's some personal nature to some of this stuff. If it's a key employee, how if they don't have the balance sheet or the access to financial resources, how are you gonna, make the numbers work such that it's equitable to your family and or to that person? Is there going to be a note, or are you going to be seller financing it, or are you going to have to help this person find, third party, funding or a capital raise of some sort? So how do you, get that key employee such that they could actually have the financial resources to execute on a transaction? And then selling is, how many people are willing to buy it, or what are they buying? And so this is where it gets to be really critical in terms of kind of the type of buy. I always think about, one of my clients, he's a successful broker. And one of his key his key things was his relationships and his relationships with clients. Well, I mean, a lot of times you can't just step into those relationships, and many of those relationships are aging and exiting the business themselves. So what actually are you buying? Is somebody going to buy a bunch of aging relationships, and what is that worth? And what are they actually buying? And so in many cases, if it's relationship based, you need to figure out how you're going to successfully transition those relationships to the buyer. And in many cases, they're going to ask for you to stay on for a period of time to solidify those relationships and or have an earnout or other financial considerations that require or are hinging upon those relationships transferring. So that's just one thing, relationships. The other thing is like, is it a process? Is it a brand? Is it a culture? So that's part of that assessment is what is the secret, sauce? What is about this business that creates so much value? And it could be as easy as cash flow, EBITDA, and it's we generate X, Y, Z. But in many cases, it's an intangible that's creating or adding to that inherent value. And it's relationships, or it could be customer, or it could be access, it could be intelligence, it could be IT, it could be product assessment. It could just be, your ability to be nimble or see the economic future, or it could be, product centric, or, something that is intent, it could be intellectual. So it tends to be a lot of intangibles to the keys to some of the inherent values of these businesses, and not as simple as dollars and cents and cash flow.
One of the biggest thing that I'm currently taking away from this conversation is the importance of taking the time of sitting down with somebody like yourself that will ask these questions that you may never think about. I mean, even just here, just talking, there's a number of topics you brought up or questions you brought up that I'm like, oh, wow. I never thought of that could be an important question. And then it just starts unraveling, right? You just started covering and it just keeps going. But just that practice alone has to be invaluable for that owner.
Yeah, it's been, succession planning has come to the forefront in the last couple of years with just the generations and aging and transitions. And I think there was, DJ, you referenced a lot of the horror stories of family offices that have, haven't transitioned effectively, and or, putting guardrails like investment committees in place. But the topic of succession planning, it's all about asking the right questions, providing enough time to adequately answer those questions, and then navigating those options and plans, not to, having flexibility. And the more that you have time to go through that process, the higher degree of success that you'll probably, inhibit. But you have to ask those questions. And in many cases, those questions take a trusted advisor to provide or have experience in this space. And so attorneys, CPAs, advisors, those types of folks that are trusted relationships, have relationships or establish, trust over a period of time, and know that they're an advocate for you, your family, and your business, are the right people to ask these types of questions and understand kind of what that means for you and how to navigate the next steps.
Cory, I'll tell you, this is a conversation that I want to come back and continue on, because I think there's a lot of different facets of this that we can continue on, and we need to continue on with this conversation that could be very helpful. I think that from, like I had mentioned before, I mean, it's just earlier the better, and really starting to think through this. And I know some families and owners that you get so busy, right? And there's so much going on. I know I need to do this. I know that I need to do this. Well, all of a sudden 1 year goes by, 2 years go by, 5 years goes by.
Yeah.
And you're like, uh-oh,
Yeah.
And you just gotta, just put a pin in it and say, we gotta start now. That's I would imagine that's safe to say, right?
Yeah. It's, it's kind of like, quadrant 2, if you're a Covey person, where it's, not urgent and it's really important. And so because it's not urgent, it tends to, in many cases, fall to the wayside and not be a high priority. But the more that you spend time in this area sooner, the better results you're going to see. And I think the biggest thing for these, families and businesses is that, the more that you become aware and earlier on in your, wealth accumulation phases, the better that you're going to have more options, well-articulated next steps and processes, because the worst is that you haven't done anything in your, later stages, 50s, 60s, and you haven't done anything. This is kind of like the estate planning, issues. I mean, it's similar in the sense that the more that you're doing a lot of this estate planning and providing for the next steps, which is hard. It's hard to talk about exits and death and taxes. I mean, all this stuff nobody likes to talk about, but let's spend, 6 hours now, and it'll save you 150 hours, later on, and also probably save the family millions of dollars.
Well, that's the thing, or hundreds of millions for all you know, right? I mean, it's and there are plenty of examples of families that did it right and families that did it wrong, and you've got to make sure that you do have the right people. So, Cory Bultinck with Wipfli, I want to thank you for being on here talking about this topic, and I definitely want to continue that. In fact, I'd also love to have even a structured conversation, even specifically about real estate families, right? Because you have all the assets, which is another aspect of it. We were talking about what's the values and everything. Well, that adds to it, right?
Yep.
So, but thank you so much for being on the show today, and let's have you back on here in the near future.
Yeah, thanks, DJ. I really appreciate it. Thanks.